Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be around the world. My name is Eric Neighberg, and I'll be your host today. I run marketing and operations here at Scrum.org, and I'm joined by one of our professional Scrum trainers, Matt Dominici, who's going to take your questions and hopefully provide some of you some answers throughout this session. Welcome, Matt. If we can just jump to the next slide. So just some quick guidelines. You will be muted, but please ask your questions. You'll see in the little go to webinar control panel an opportunity to ask questions. Just have those sent, and we will do our best to get as many of them in as we can. Generally, we get more questions than we have time for. And what we do in that instance is send those additional questions over to Matt to make sure he can respond to you via email and do his best to answer any questions that we didn't have time for. Next slide. So just briefly, for those of you new to this series, who is Scrum.org? Scrum.org is founded by Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum, and he continues as our chairman. Ken built Scrum.org really based on a mission to help people and teams solve complex problems, which is what Scrum does. Our goal is really to be consistent around the world and build a community of Scrum users who are speaking a common language and have a common understanding. And we do that through thought leadership, putting out things like this webinar to help you learn, and lots of other things, including the work that Ken does with his co-creator, Jeff Sutherland, on the Scrum Guide, and lots of other papers, articles, and the like. We provide training around the world with people, our professional Scrum trainers, who are delivering the same content and same material to give that consistent learning around the globe. We've got over 440,000 people now certified on Scrum through Scrum.org. And we have our learning paths to help you keep learning. It doesn't stop with a training class or with a certification. We're always learning, we're always growing. Next slide. So with that, I will let Matt introduce himself, and we will then get to your questions. Matt?
Cool, thanks, Eric. So hi, everybody. I'm Matt Dominici. Just a little bit of background on myself. So I'm located in Toronto, Canada. I live here with my wife, Natalie, my 2.5-year-old son, our 6-month-old daughter, our dog, Chuck, and we've also got a bird. So pretty full house up here in Toronto, keeping us on our toes. Some background on myself. I kind of tell people I kind of grew up in QA. So I started off as a tester, lots of manual testing, reams and reams of test cases, all that kind of good thing. And eventually kind of got into the management side of things. So I was in charge of building these big QA departments. And somewhere around there, I was introduced to this idea of Scrum by a colleague, actually. Seemed kind of interesting, started to dig into it a little bit. I went pretty deep. And as I got deeper into learning about the framework, I started to realize that my role as a QA manager of a big QA department, I was kind of part of the problem. And what I mean by that was I was in charge of this big department whose main goal was to not ship software. Our goal was to put the brakes on because, by the time it got to us, everything was broken. There's bugs all over the place, all that sort of thing. And so that didn't really feel so great. So as I started to kind of learn a little bit more, I decided to sort of leave that role behind, leave that manager role behind, and just become a Scrum Master. So spent a couple of years working as a Scrum Master at a couple of different companies. Eventually got into a bit more coaching, larger groups, larger organizations, that sort of thing, and eventually became a professional Scrum trainer. So that was back in 2018. So since then, I've been doing primarily training, coaching, consulting, companies of all sizes, startups, bootstrapped startups, all the way to companies that have been around for a century and a half in the financial industry. So pretty broad set of experience with those, and yeah, I'm looking forward to taking some questions today.
Great, thanks, Matt. And Lindsay, if we can just go to that next slide. We are ready for your questions. So first question came in. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to try to break it down a little bit. It really kind of goes into the sprint backlog and product backlog items up. So I'll do my best to read it here. When when a team's in a situation it cannot finish all of the product backlog items in the sprint backlog, and they may incur technical debt and to deliver the sprint goal. What's better, having undone work or having that technical debt? I guess I kind of read this as, it looks like they're bringing in too much work into the sprint backlog and not necessarily refining the best they can. But you may have some other thoughts there, and then feel free to ask additional questions, Himandri, if you've got further questions that maybe refine it better. Matt?
Yeah, so lots, great first question. Lots of stuff to unpack there. I think there's a few things that we want to take into account when we're presented with this. And this is like a fairly common thing, especially teams that are new to doing Scrum, right? We get to some point in the sprint where we see, the work that's left to do, we see the time that's left in the sprint, and we're just like, no way, it's not going to happen. So we have some choices that we can make. Generally, the first conversation we probably want to have is around prioritization, right? What's the most valuable stuff that's still left in our sprint backlog? Can we just maybe focus on one or two things that are really high value items and maybe forget about the rest for now and really focus on that? I think there was another kind of take in there around potentially taking on some technical debt, maybe to get them all completed within the sprint. And I guess the way that was framed was, is it better to have undone work versus taking on some technical debt? So if we're talking about shipping stuff, the hard and fast answer is, yeah, taking on technical debt. Shipping something with technical debt is probably better than shipping something that's undone, because something that's undone is effectively broken, right? So that's the kind of top line, but we can get into some nuance there, right? As we take on technical debt, all that really is technical debt is referring to the increased cost of future changes. So if we're going to do it, let's do it in a conscious way. Let's make sure that our product owner understands what we're doing and what the cost is of that technical debt, right? Something along the lines of, yeah, we can get these things done. We're going to be taking on some technical debt. So that means that, the next few sprints, it's going to be a lot harder to make some changes to our product. So being transparent about it that way. And I guess finally, if we're going to go down that path, let's make sure that at the very least we're kind of enumerating that technical debt that we're taking on, right? I mean, think about debt. If you take on a mortgage from a bank and you don't know how much you have left to pay on that mortgage, you're going to have a hard time managing your finances. And the same kind of principle applies here. So if we're going to do that, let's enumerate it. Let's maybe have some future change improvement stuff in our product backlog so that we're not losing track of it. But yeah, I think I touched on most of those items. Hopefully that makes sense to you all.
Thanks, Matt. I think that works. One question that kind of came, excuse me, during this, and you started to kind of explain it a little bit, but not everybody's familiar with what is technical debt. Can you give maybe that 30-second, what is technical debt?
Yeah, so I gave you that kind of like really top line. It just refers to the increased cost of future changes, but more specifically, it's that thing where we maybe cut a little bit of a corner, right? Maybe we still adhere to our definition of done technically, but we wrote some tests, but they're not really at the right level. We wrote one big, giant automated functional test that maybe tests like 6 functions instead of the one that we probably want it to do. So it's something that can be, you're following your definition of done to the letter of the law, but it can creep up on you. And if we keep making those decisions, eventually we end up at a point where things just kind of grind to a halt, and we can no longer make progress because we have just a bunch of technical debt. And I've worked in companies where they've gotten to that point where they were spending 100% of their capacity just trying to unwind technical debt, and they weren't able to actually make any progress from a product perspective. They weren't able to add new features or enhance the existing features. They were just like scrambling to keep the lights on kind of thing. And that's because they made that choice over and over and over again.
Great, thanks, Matt. That's perfect. I think that makes it quite clear. So next question from Maximilian. And I'm not going to limit you to this or make you go all the way to here. What he asks is, what are the first 10 things, but if you have 8 or 6 or you have 12, let's go with that, that you do when starting on a new Scrum team?
So I'm going to assume that you're saying starting on a new Scrum team, maybe as a Scrum Master.
Yeah, I was going to go as a Scrum Master. Yeah.
I'll make that assumption. So yeah, we could probably spend like the rest of the time and have like a really long list. But there are some common patterns, and a lot of this is, I'll give you the consultant answer of like it kind of depends on the situation. But broadly speaking, the first thing I'm doing largely is observing. I'm not trying to join a team and be heavy-handed right off the bat and start pointing out, oh, you're doing this wrong, and this isn't Scrum, and this is bad, and all that sort of thing, because you can imagine how the reaction to that would be. So I'm generally pretty quiet in the early days. In the pre-COVID days, this was kind of easier because you could just sit in the team room with people and just kind of observe, listen, find out how often people are talking to each other. Do people just get together for their daily Scrum and then they don't talk at all throughout the course of the day? That kind of thing. So you're just kind of picking up some cues around the team dynamic. At the same time, I'm starting to set up some individual kind of one-on-one meetings with people in the team. From the development team, the product owner, if there was like a previous Scrum Master, I'm looking for that person to try and talk to them as well. And just trying to build relationships really with people. So I'm asking kind of open-ended, probing kind of questions, not hammering them about mistakes or anything like that, just kind of learning in a safe sort of one-on-one environment. And I'm kind of looking for patterns and themes and different threads to kind of pull on. So I'm making notes and I'm talking to people, and after I get through everybody maybe once or twice, I kind of sit back and I kind of go over all of those notes and I start to just highlight the similarities. What's everybody kind of talking about? And are there any like big outliers that maybe just one person has like one really big problem, but nobody else is mentioning it. And then I'm kind of distilling that into like a list that I'm going to prioritize and start to work through either tackling or investigating further or just having larger conversations based on what people are saying individually, that sort of thing. So that's kind of like the initial bit. I'm not making changes, just listening, meeting with people, that sort of thing. I'm also starting to look at to get a sense of where the team is at from a technical practices perspective. And again, in the beginning, this isn't to just point out mistakes. This is just to better understand, right? At the high level, how often are we actually releasing product to our users? Is that happening on a schedule? Are we doing it on demand? Or how often is it happening? If we're shipping to production every few months or something, I'm going to have a different take on that as opposed to whether we're doing that like on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or something like that. So I'm starting to get an understanding of where the team is at based on that. Can kind of fast forward a little bit, and once I've kind of established that that relationship with people, I've kind of built a little bit of a trust. They know that I'm not here to just hit them over the head and demand immediate change or anything like that. That's when I'll start to take some more concrete action. And that can take a bunch of different forms, right? Sometimes that's just realizing certain problem areas and having some really targeted small kind of training type sessions, right? Teaching some different techniques. Sometimes it's more coaching and guiding them towards getting a better understanding of what's important to them, right? What are their team values? A lot of times, teams are just put together, they're handed a bunch of work and they just kind of get to it, and they don't really stop to think what's actually important to them. And when you're a new person on a team, sometimes it's a good opportunity to kind of reflect that back to them, and kind of take them through a bit of an exercise, right? There's a bunch of different ways to do that. One thing I've had some really good success with is called the high performing tree, which is something that you can Google as an exercise by Lisa Atkins, who wrote a really great book called Coaching Agile Teams, which I'd also highly recommend. And you just kind of walk them through that, right? You kind of focus on what are the roots of our tree. If we're doing Scrum, Scrum has 5 values. Do we agree with those values? Let's start there and kind of work our way up and start to look for, okay, if this is what we care about, this is what we value, what are some of the things that we're doing to enact those values? What are the concrete things that we as a team are doing, or maybe not doing, that we want to start doing? And then, not to go so far into the exercise, but you get to that point, and then you start to think about, okay, what's the fruit that we can expect to get from this tree, right? If we focus on our values, we make those concrete and do actions that enact those values, what are the results we can expect to see? And that helps the team kind of figure out if they're kind of going on the right path. So I don't know. I don't think that was 10. That was maybe like 3 or 4 things. But hopefully that gives like a good idea of where to get started. Based on those exercises, you go in a multitude of different directions with the team.
Great, thanks, Matt. I think that's perfect. So next question, kind of sticking a little bit with some of the previous stuff. Excuse me. How can we effectively make use of the sprint goal, and especially in making sure that it's coherent and tied to the PBIs that we're pulling in for the sprint?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, a few things here with this one too. I think one really good litmus test to help us understand if we've got ourselves a really good sprint goal is if the development team obviously understands it, but maybe more importantly, if they're able to see the flexibility that that goal offers to them. And so what I mean by that is, we do our sprint planning, right? We come up with our sprint goal, we forecast our sprint backlog, we've got a bunch of PBIs in there. If we could see the potential for changing some of those PBIs in our sprint backlog as we start doing the work and still be able to achieve our goal, that tells us that we're probably on the right path. Like we've probably got ourselves a pretty good goal. On the flip side of that, if you have a sprint goal where you're just like, the only way that we could possibly achieve the sprint goal is by doing these exact 5 things that we talked about or whatever at the sprint planning meeting, that tells me that we don't really have a goal. We just have kind of like almost like a dictation, right? We have to do these things. And the way that that tends to manifest itself that I see a lot in teams is the sprint goal becomes very long, and sometimes you'll see like a bulleted list that says like, this, and it kind of turns into a checklist. And that's not really the spirit of what we're after with that sprint goal, right? It gives us that solid thing where like, yes, our sprint goal isn't going to change, but as a development team, as we start doing the work to get to achieving that goal, we may see some different paths that we can take. And so we've got the flexibility as a development team to kind of change that, right? Instead of doing these 10 things, we're actually going to do these 7 things because we think it'll get us to our sprint goal, whatever, more effectively, faster, have a better result, whatever. So that's kind of like the litmus test, I guess, for me. And that's how that sprint goal should inform us, throughout the sprint. We're getting together at our daily scrum every day. We're talking about, reiterating our sprint goal and talking about how we're going to make some progress towards that. And that could entail the stuff that's already in our sprint backlog, or maybe something different.
Great, thanks, Matt. That's excellent. I think that this is super helpful. Just for everybody, I threw in the chat the book, the Lisa Atkins book that Matt mentioned. I threw a link in there for everybody in the chat in case you're interested. A couple of people asked for that, so I just figured I'd share it with everyone.
Yeah, highly recommend it. That one, sorry, I just that book kind of like changed a little bit the trajectory of my my career in Agile and Scrum. So just another plug. Really good book.
Awesome. So David asks, how do you introduce Scrum into an old-fashioned, less dynamic organization? He asked some leading questions, which I'm not gonna bring up. I'll let you kind of take that part. Otherwise, it kind of leads you down potential paths.
Sure. You just go hard and fast. You just kind of tell them, we're going to do it Scrum and throw everything else out. And you're good to go. It's like a magic bullet. No, it's obviously way more complex than that. And the answer to this really changes based on how big the company is, how long they've been around, how long they've been doing things the way that they're already doing them. But there are a couple of patterns that I've seen be successful that will kind of help move things along, right? So even in like, large 80,000, 90,000 people companies. So that kind of joking thing that I said at the beginning, like definitely don't do that. That just doesn't work, especially at large organizations. They just will kind of reject it because it's too big of a change to handle all at once. So it's just not going to work. So what we look for are areas of the company where we have people in leadership positions that kind of have a worldview that aligns a little bit more closely to this kind of stuff. Because in a big organization, you have a spectrum. Not everybody thinks about things the same way. You're looking for pockets where there's probably going to be some support from above, and more specifically, some support to have some failure along the way, because this is hard for large organizations to do, and nobody ever gets it right the first time. So, from the outside in, if I'm coming in as like a consultant or something, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for an area where we can start to change this a little bit. And really what we're looking for in doing that are small wins, right? And I'm sure many people have heard that term. We're looking for small wins that we can use and point to. So that could be a multitude of things. So the more common one is we kind of take one small part of the organization and we kind of treat doing Scrum in that pocket as kind of a pilot, right? Maybe even just one Scrum team in that organization. And we kind of give them some safety from the rest of the organization. And we start to kind of layer the framework in there, right? We start to give them a goal. We start to give them a product owner emerges, right? And that could be someone from the existing business that takes on this role as kind of like a experiment, right? We get one team going and we kind of focus on them and, again, give them the space to fail, all that sort of thing. And eventually they're going to start to, two things are going to happen. They're going to start to get the hang of this thing from a framework perspective. And that gives us a win to point to, right? We could say, look, this team started doing things a little bit differently, and they saw these kinds of successes. They were able to solve some customer problems faster, whatever it is. The other area, kind of lost my train of thought there. We give them that early win, and so the second bit is they were going to start to like butt up against the areas in the organizations that are going to make it very problematic to start to like have this expand, right? So the really common example I come across is we spin up a pilot team, they do really well, and eventually something comes down their product backlog that involves someone from, let's say, the compliance department or from the audit department, somewhere else in the company that is really not used to operating in Scrum or any kind of agile fashion, right? They're used to kind of slow, long lead times, all that sort of thing. And so that team is going to struggle with that, right? They're going to be up against it. The Scrum team is going to be traveling faster than the rest of the organization can keep up with them. And as a Scrum Master, or if I'm consulting there or whatever, I'm kind of taking note of those areas. And the idea then is you start to kind of get a map of, where are the impediments, for lack of a better word, going to live in this organization, and do we need to, spin up some efforts to either improve those or remove them or change what's needed to get things done from the Scrum team's perspective, and you can start to kind of fan out through the organization that way. And this is one of those areas where we always say the Scrum Master, one of the myths is a Scrum Master is just like a pure team level role. And in reality, to be a good Scrum Master, you have to also serve the organization, right? You've got that line of service out into the company. So you're going to have to go and talk to people in those different departments and try to bring them into the process, show them that, by collaborating with the Scrum team a bit more effectively, their goals are going to be reached in a better way too. So that's one of the more common patterns that I see work pretty well. Certainly much better than just like trying to flip a switch and making everybody start adopting Scrum right off the bat. Hope that gives a good answer on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And certainly, if folks have follow-on questions, feel free to ask them as well. We'll do our best. We do have a lot of them piling up also. So next question, how do you coach, or do you have suggestions on coaching a team that's trying to do Scrum, but they're not a cross-functional team?
Yeah, so this is kind of related to that first question. A lot of times, organizations that start to try and adopt Scrum, they kind of start to lay the framework in there, but they're still using what we call component teams, right? So the opposite of cross-functional, right? We have a team focused on just just the database layer or something like that. And so if you're in a position where you're coaching that particular team, it's very similar to what I was talking about before, right? You're going to have to fan out into the organization and start to find ways to help the team become more cross-functional. So that could involve like organizational change, which is hard and sometimes scary, but it can also involve looking inside the team for opportunities to grow those skills within the team itself. Right. So in the example I used, a team full of database folks or backend developers, whatever it is. If we have a goal for that team that involves more than just the backend, let's try to get them those skills. And there's a million different ways to go about that, right? We can go to the organization and try to get some buy-in for some training for them on a particular skill set. If we have those skills, outside the team, but still within the organization, can we borrow somebody to pair up with for a little while and start to learn how to do some, front-end code or whatever it is that we're missing? So there's kind of two tracks here, right? There, as a Scrum Master, you're focused on the team because you want to help them to improve and become more cross-functional themselves, but you're also looking to the broader organization to see, do we need to make some changes? Do I need to coach leadership to help them understand the value of a cross-functional team? And just even going back 2 questions, right? If you can get a small win by doing that, it kind of starts to grow, kind of starts to spread throughout the organization.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. So next question. Next question I have just disappeared. Oh, here we go. There's a couple of questions around this same idea, actually. And I think, this is always a kind of a bit of a hot button for me as well. One person asks, in a sprint, we create tasks and the team members fill in their hours against it. But if they're not doing it correctly or honestly, it messes up sprint matrices. Do you have some ideas around getting consistency? Someone else asks a very similar question around, what metrics do you use to measure? Another is, if we have items in our product backlog, how do you estimate them against dollars, and how much is it going to cost? Because management's asking. So there's a whole bunch of questions around this, measurement and forecasting.
Yeah.
And to me, one of the things that is a hot button to me, I've written a couple articles about this, is certainly number one, don't ever use velocity as a way to measure team against team, because it's always going to be team dependent. And it has no one team's velocity is completely independent as another's, and don't use it as a weapon, and really start focusing on measuring value and that sort of thing. But kind of bringing it back, do you have suggestions around forecasting, getting consistency in forecasting? And we always know management, right? You've worked at some pretty large banks.
Yep.
Management always wants to know, all right, how much is this thing going to cost me? And any suggestions around those different areas?
Yep. So first off, if anyone's ever interested in wading into a tire fire on Twitter, just look up the no estimates hashtag. It's probably died down the last couple of years, but I'm sure all the history of arguing there is still up there. So yeah, this is definitely a hot button topic in our industry. Where to start? So definitely agree with you, Eric, on the don't use velocity to measure team versus team. When we talk about velocity, usually what we're talking about, and I'll make an assumption here that's probably correct, is we're talking about story points, right? one of the more common things that teams use to estimate their work. So the first thing I have to say full stop is, if you go to the Scrum guide and you Control F and type in story points, you ain't going to see it. It's not a part of Scrum. It's a complementary practice that can help teams to forecast and plan and all that sort of thing. But for all those things that that Eric just mentioned, it can also very much get in the way of the team and become much more problematic. So there are different ways to do this. Okay, the very basic of it is, if we are doing story points, the forecasting thing is just a matter of, how many points are left to do and how fast, right, velocity, are we going sprint over sprint. So if we typically get done 10 things and we have 100 things, 100 points, whatever we're calling them, we probably need 10 sprints to get to complete all of those PBIs. That's how it's kind of supposed to work. And where it tends to go wrong is, all of those things. We start to share the points outside of the team. Management gets a hold of them. It's a number to latch onto. Hey, this team is doing 10 points per sprint, and this team is doing 37 points per sprint. What's up, team one? Like, why do you suck so much? And so if we're going to use them, we have to really understand that they're purely relative numbers. They could be anything. You could even take the numbers out of them altogether and just, I've seen teams just go with different types of dogs, right? Is that a Chihuahua, or is that a German Shepherd, to kind of size things out? So that's kind of that one. There are other ways to do this that are probably a little bit more effective and actually even more accurate, probably. And to kind of give you one option at a kind of a somewhat high level view of things, we can look at this more in terms of flow metrics, right? So there's a Scrum.org class called Professional Scrum with Kanban that goes into great depths here, so I probably won't do it as good justice as that class would do it. But the basic premise is, instead of focusing on things like story points and task hours and worksheets and hour sheets, all that kind of thing, you just do a couple things. As a team, you decide to focus on splitting our product backlog items as small as possible, right? Let's just all commit to making them as small as we possibly can while still providing some amount of value, right? And value is something that we define, right? It can mean whatever we need it to mean. That could be ROI, it could be learning for the company, validating an idea, whatever value means to you in your context. So we focus on making our product backlog items as small as possible. So they're always going to be a little bit different, but at least for the most part, they're all going to be pretty tiny. And then we just count items, right? We don't have to care about story points anymore. We don't need to care about velocity and that sort of thing. What we're looking at is a term called throughput, right? How many things get through our system on a sprint by sprint basis? If we're doing, let's say, 2-week sprints, every 2 weeks, how many things make it across the line? And we just have to count. And based on that counting, we can do our forecasting. We can do all kinds of different things. Not to go so far into it again, but we can get into Monte Carlo simulations, right? Where we just look at our historical data, we run what's left to do through a million simulations, and we can start to talk about when things are going to complete in terms of confidence level, right? We run the simulation a million times, and 95% of the times we ran the simulation, everything finished by date X, February 3rd, whatever, make up a date. That tends to be a little bit more accurate, and it also gives you a prompt for more meaningful conversations when it comes to things like that, right? If we only have budget for 10 sprints and our forecast is showing that, to get to this point in our product backlog, we actually need, 15 sprints, we need to start having a conversation around scope, right? What can we focus on, again, as from a value perspective? What's the most valuable set of items in our product backlog? And let's focus on those, because the stuff at the bottom, we ain't going to get there, at least not with the budget that we have or the time that we have or whatever the constraint is there. So yeah, hopefully that helps. The flow metrics thing, there's a lot of stuff that you can look into there. There's a book by another PST called, what's it called, Eric? Actionable Agile Metrics. I made a butcher of the name of the book.
Actionable Agile. Yep.
Yep. That goes really deep into a lot of this stuff. And, as if you're kind of at a point where you're kind of fed up with the story points thing and it's leading you down the wrong roads and all that sort of thing, I'd really recommend checking that out because there's a lot of good stuff that may give you an alternative path that will get you to a better place.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I'll post a link to that book in the chat in a moment. So another common question I'm seeing here, and especially I guess probably some of it's due to the times that we're in as well, and people are looking for roles and jobs. And we get this question a lot in our forums and other places. Do you have some advice? You became a Scrum Master once. Do you have advice on how did you become a Scrum Master, and what should people do, or any advice on how folks can look to become Scrum Masters? Maybe changing roles, maybe adding to their role, and so on.
Yeah, so start with a joke again. The first thing you do is go out and get your PSM1 certification. That'll make everything great for you. Cool. So in reality, I can speak to my own experience with this, right? Like when I kind of introduced myself, I was saying I was kind of in the management ranks by the time I started to find out about this. And so my path towards becoming a Scrum Master was to just start doing some of this stuff in the position that I was already in, right? So, it wasn't Scrum, it wasn't great, but I was starting to learn by doing some of this stuff. So, had a couple of QA teams, and we were a QA team. There was no cross functionality there, but that's what was in my circle of control at the time. And so we started doing some Scrum type stuff. We didn't have a product backlog, but you know what? We started to have a daily Scrum and talking about, what are we going to do today that's going to get us a little bit closer to, in our case, being able to release the product was the high level goal, not really a sprint goal, but we started to have those kinds of conversations. I was, in that initial role I was in, I was able to get a bit of buy-in from a colleague of mine who was managing one of the development teams, and we were able to kind of put those two teams not really together because we didn't have the power to do that, but to get them to start working in a more collaborative way. So we started to see things like, that daily Scrum that I was doing with just the QA team. Every once in a while, there'd be a developer that would come to that and give an update on some bug fix that they were working on or whatever. And so that was really how I was putting into practice some of the stuff I was learning, right? So you could say I was kind of preparing in a couple of different ways, right? I was going out and doing the learning. I did take a class. I did read a couple of books and blog posts and watch videos. There's an insane amount of information out there that's free to consume. And so as I was learning that, I was trying to apply things where it was, and that was my preparation. And I used to have a manager that was really good at defining luck for people. And I can't remember what movie this is from, but like the definition of luck being when preparation meets opportunity. And so I was able to focus on that preparation thing, and the luck part was that there was an opportunity that had come up to come in as a Scrum Master for a company that was also just starting with Scrum, and they were just new with this stuff. So I was like the first outside Scrum Master hire in that organization, and I wouldn't have had any kind of success in that role if I wouldn't have been focusing on the learning prior, but also putting into practice things that I could put into practice in my current role. And that I think applies to anything. I mean, I was in a management role, but if you're in a development role, you can start to talk to your fellow developers about, starting to do some of these things and experiment with them. And that can go a bunch of different ways, right? That can snowball very quickly. And all of a sudden, you're at a company that is actually trying to adopt Scrum. And you're maybe stepping into that role and maybe stepping out of that previous role that you were in. So for me, it was those two tracks. It was the learning, reading classes, all that kind of good stuff, but putting into practice whatever I could on that front. And I'll give you even another different example that maybe is even more in the left field than that. One of the best Scrum Masters I've worked with over the course of my career, she started off in sales. She was working with the sales department in this team. in this organization. And similar story, she started to learn about some of this stuff. She started to get the salespeople on her team together and talking more and doing something like a daily scrum and doing a little bit of planning, right? Planning out their sales calls for the week at the beginning of the week kind of thing, similar to a sprint planning sort of situation. And same thing, she in that company transitioned from that sales role to a scrum master working with development teams. And like she had no software background whatsoever. It was just that curiosity, the learning, and the practice that kind of shifted it that way. Hope that helps. Everyone's story is different, but I hear themes like that, all the time.
Great, thanks, Matt. Next question here is, let's see, there's one, oh, there it is, I had lost it. As a Scrum Master, do you provide reports to and for your team? If so, what kind of reports are you providing?
So that's phrased kind of interestingly, and I'll maybe kind of poke on that. So if I heard right, do you provide reports to and for your teams? And to me, those are kind of two different things, right? And I'll get into what we mean by reports in a second. But if you're doing something to your team, like if you're providing something to your team, reflecting back to your team to help them understand how they're doing and what's working and what's not working for them, that's cool, right? You're reflecting back to the team and maybe helping them to resolve some issues that they're having. If you're on the flip side of that, if you're providing reports for your teams, I'm going to make the assumption that that is like reports outside of the team, right? Like this is how the team is doing, management group or whatever it is. That's where it can become a little bit more problematic, I would say. So I'm going to make some more assumptions here, but we're probably talking about things like burn down charts, things like that, things of that nature that are pretty common in the Scrum world. If we're doing things like burn down charts, burn down reports, whatever you want to call them, couple things. First thing, those kinds of charts, those kinds of reports can be very helpful within the team, right? So again, like I said, if you're reflecting that back to the team and making it visible to them, that's great. However, the maintenance of that, the creation of that is really an act of managing. Let's think about what this is, right? It's managing the progress of the team towards their sprint goal. And who's best to manage progress towards a goal? Probably the people that are working on achieving that goal, right? So I would say that the maintenance of that artifact, if we're producing it, which is not a part of Scrum, could be a complementary practice, what we would call it. It should be the development team that's kind of taking ownership of that. You may need to step into the Scrum Master to say, hey, development team, you're producing this. Let's actually look at it and use it and see how things are going, right? If we reflect that back to the development team and our burn down chart is going up and to the right instead of indicating that we're actually getting closer to our sprint goal, that's an opportunity for the development team to take action. So if they're not actually looking at it, that's something that as a Scrum Master you want to step in and make sure that it's happening, or have a conversation about what would be better, right? If the team has gone through all this effort of producing a burn down chart and they're not looking at it or they're not getting any value out of it, let's ask that question. Why are we doing this? And is there maybe a better way that we can think of to kind of monitor our progress within the sprint towards a goal? So I hope that answers the question. I don't know if I left some pieces off of that, but that's kind of my take on it.
So Maximilian kind of just adds to that just to make sure we covered it. To the team itself, are there things that you might report directly to the team, not necessarily up to management? Any additional things?
Could be, and like the word, report to the team is kind of strong, right? I'm always going to lean on. We're just trying to reflect reality back to them. So it could be things like that, right? It could be reflecting that, hey, we our forecast said that we would be here, and we're actually somewhere different. So what does that mean to you all as a development team? That's like all good and fair game.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I often look at with the team is, are there things that they need to help them do their job? So it's not necessarily metrics reports, but it's more clarity on product backlog items, and working with the product owner to make sure that they're clearly defined and provided, making sure that definition of done is clearly defined and provided, and the like, to ensure consistency across the team. So it's less about metrics and much more about the things to help them have a consistent understanding and realization.
Yeah, and to add to that even further, like you can extend that to things like on the CI/CD side of things, right? If we're deploying to production, like reporting back to the team how often and how successful their deploys are, if they're not already looking at that kind of stuff, it could be very helpful, because I could lead them to try to improve their own tooling in order to be able to improve that kind of thing.
Yep, perfect. Thank you. So we still have a little bit of time here. So this is another common kind of question that I've seen, and we've got a few in here that are similar. We understand the sprint goal is certainly more than just a bunch of completed product backlog items, but we struggle with really defining a sprint goal. Do you have some ideas, suggestions, thoughts, maybe techniques around how to best define sprint goals and how to help coach the team to doing so?
Yeah, there's, and that's pretty common too. And this is one of those areas where the Scrum Guide doesn't really tell us how to do this. It just tells us that we probably need to have a good sprint goal. So what I've seen some teams do is treat kind of coming up with that goal as sort of the best way I can describe it is kind of a multi-pass kind of scenario, where we come into sprint planning, and the product owner may have some idea of a sprint goal, and maybe in the beginning it is kind of like a listicle. It's just like these 5 things. And we just kind of in the planning event, we kind of say, okay, let's just kind of keep going. Let's start working on the forecast. Let's start working on the plan. And at some point, let's pause and kind of look back and see, okay, how does this match up with what those 5 things were that you thought were really important? And we kind of go through that process a few times, and then we start to kind of whittle away and look for themes across those items, right? Like go through them kind of one by one and ask, why are we doing this? Why? So, product owner, you start off with these 5 things as your goal. Why is this important? Why is this important? Why is this important? Kind of go through that, and then look for the themes and the answers to those questions, because there's often some higher order thing that we're actually trying to achieve by focusing on those 5 things or 10 things or whatever it is. And if we can get it to a point where we understand why, from like the simplest, overly simple example, we need to increase registrations by some number over the next couple months, and this sprint we're going to be focusing on reducing some friction in the funnel so that we can achieve that metric that we're after from a business perspective later on. So you have to kind of work through it sometimes to start to pull out those themes, and sometimes you have to even go like beyond the immediate goal and then kind of come back and see, okay, this is our big goal that we're after. What can we do that's meaningful in the next, if we're doing 2-week sprints, in the next 2 weeks to get us set up to achieve that higher order goal that we're after. And then that becomes the goal, and it's not just a list of things, it's some overarching thing that we're striving towards.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So Craig has a question. What if we have a cross-functional team, but not all of the team members have work to do in a certain time during the sprint? Do you have them do something that's take something from the product backlog rather that's in the sprint backlog? Do you have suggestions on ways to work through that?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and my brain always goes in like a few different directions because there's so many things to think about with that one. So the first one is usually when we come across that situation and it feels like a problem, especially to management or outside of the team, it usually tells me something as a Scrum Master or as a consultant or whatever work I'm doing, that the organization may be valuing utilization of people over the actual value that is being provided to the organization by those teams. So that's always something that, like, it always gets my antenna up a little bit, and something that I want to dig a little bit more on, right? And it's kind of, it's easy to fall into that, right? Because people make a salary or an hourly rate if they're contractors or whatever. It's expensive to have people, and we don't want people just twiddling their thumbs because we're paying for them. Blah 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 blah. So that's usually one of the first conversations I try to have is, what do we actually care about as a team or as an organization? Do we want everybody to be busy, or do we want to be providing value? So that's the first conversation I have. The second thing I look at, and this is really with the team, is whichever way we go with this. If we decide that we're going to try to do something about it, right? Whichever way we go, the number one rule we need to keep in mind is anything we do should not put our ability to get to a done increment within the sprint at risk. Okay, so whichever way we go, whatever we decide to do, if we're gonna, I think Eric, you kind of mentioned, go into the product backlog maybe and try to pull something in. If you're gonna do that, make sure you do it in a way, or decide not to do it at all, that will put the increment at risk, right? Because you can get yourself into a situation where we did more work as a team because everybody was busy for the whole sprint, but now we actually have nothing to show for it because we started this thing just because someone happened to have some free time on their hands. And we did the coding and we merged it and we tested that thing, but now guess what? The regression tests are failing. So we can't actually release this now. We no longer have a releasable increment of product. And we got into this situation just because we wanted to make people busy. Not a great place to be. So that's like the number one rule to keep in mind. So if we can stick to that guideline, we have options, right? There's many different things that this person or these people can look at. The first thing I tend to go to is just ask everybody else on the team, hey, is there anything I can help with? Can we pair up on something that's in progress? Is there something that's already been started that I can help get to done before maybe starting something new? That's kind of number one to look at. Another area to look at is just improvement type items, right? We were talking a little bit earlier about technical debt. Sometimes technical debt is just that we have a bunch of pieces of our product that are missing automated tests, let's say. Just make something up. Well, we've got some free time on our hands now. Let's kind of reach into that bucket and kind of clean up some technical debt. Let's add some tests. Let's make the quality of our product better. And you can do that in a way that doesn't risk the increment and all that sort of thing. So that's maybe number two that I would look at. And then the other option is like literally just actually do nothing. Like go do some research about maybe growing some skill sets or something like that, but don't actually do anything in the product. That's an option. Sometimes it's a hard one for management to be okay with, but it's there. And again, as long as we're kind of sticking to that guideline of whatever we do, don't put the increment at risk. It's the worst thing we could do. We'll be okay.
Awesome, thanks. So next question, I actually had this conversation with one of our professional Scrum trainers this week. We're an IT department inside a pharmaceutical industry. To make viable running Scrum, we need to form a Scrum team to work on multiple product teams, and we have a single product owner who has good knowledge about the products. My question is, for the Scrum Guide, is this a valid use of Scrum? And can we say that we are using Scrum? So my short answer is yes, but thoughts?
Yeah, the interesting thing, before even going into it, the thing that always jumps to my mind is that important? Like, do you care that you can call it Scrum or not? So that's the first question that you need to kind of answer for yourself. And I think I heard a couple of things in there that, and Eric, maybe you can keep me honest if I heard it right or not. But we've got one product that we're working on, maybe multiple teams, but we have one product owner for that product. Did I hear that part correctly?
Correct, yep.
Okay, so yeah, that's the kind of as close to actually a by the book definition of doing Scrum as you can, right? We have one product, therefore we need to have one product owner. It gets really difficult to do it differently, right? If we have one product, but every team gets their own product owner, well, who actually owns the product, right? Like who actually owns those higher order strategic decisions? And so it ends up having to be done by committee, and you end up with like a really disjointed product because of it. So yeah, one product owner. Each of those development teams, and again, you keep me honest if I'm kind of if I heard that all correctly, but each of those development teams would have their own sprint backlog, right? Based off of that one product backlog for that one product, which is owned by that one product owner, right? So this is like the kind of simplest way of doing Scrum with multiple teams, right? One product owner, one product backlog, multiple sprint backlogs. And each of those teams are doing their own sprint planning off of that singular product backlog. So if you're doing it that way, it's hard to do it that way in a lot of organizations, so good. But if you're doing it that way, yeah, I would say that it's Scrum. And there's probably a lot of stuff that you can add to that that would be complementary to help with that effort.
Awesome, thanks. And yeah, I think the conversation I had with someone earlier this week was, that's okay. They may be a couple of small products that they're working on, and it makes the most sense for them to work on this together. As long as it's, you don't have multiple product owners per product. Let's work the way it makes sense, and let's not get so caught up. Remember, Scrum is a framework. It's not a methodology, and it's a very simple framework. And the idea is that you do the things that make sense for you as a team and you as an organization to be successful. And that's when I talk to Ken Schwaber about this, that is the thing he emphasizes more than anything else. Do what it takes to make you successful. We're prescribing very little, right? Scrum is 3 roles, 4 events plus the sprint, so 5 events in total. Talk about 4 plus 1, that container. It's about ensuring that we're constantly inspecting and adapting how we work. We do that on a daily basis, and we do it on a basis of 30 days or less to ensure that we are always inspecting and adapting, and that we're not losing sight of feedback from internal and external. Beyond that, how you work and the way you work is quite open to you. So I want to be conscious of our time box. Lindsay, if we can jump to the next slide. We're just about out of time, and like I said, Matt will get back to you, those of you whose questions we weren't able to get to. And I want to thank everybody for their time today. Just remember, learning never stops. We have our different learning paths for product owners, for development team members, for Scrum Masters, and for leaders within organizations as well. Those are available. They're free up on our website. Keep learning, keep looking, keep watching. The next slide. And with that, I just want to again say thank you to the audience. Thank you, Matt, for your time, and everyone have a great, safe day. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks everybody. Appreciate the questions.